First of all, I have been loving the Quest 3 since launch. And since then, my Quest 2 has been sitting on the shelf collecting dust. And honestly, no one would want to go back to the Quest 2 from the Quest 3, right? No, someone would. Me would. That's who. Now I decided I would get my Quest 2 out of retirement, retest it, and see what my impressions are after experiencing the quality that is the Quest 3. Hopefully my insights in doing this will help you decide whether you buy the Quest 3, the Quest 2, or whether you want to upgrade, or whether it's not actually worth upgrading. Now this is normally not what I do. When I upgrade something to the latest model, normally the old version does one of three things. It either goes to a family member, it gets sold, or it goes in the bin. I feel like doing this feels like arriving at the pearly gates and then suddenly being sucked down into hell. Seeing what you could have, but then being brought back to reality. But what did I actually notice doing this? Well, the first thing was the lenses. Oh my word, what an upgrade the pancake lenses are. When you first put on the new headset, you don't really necessarily notice it, but when you go back to the Quest 2, you realise how blurry the Fresnel lenses on the Quest 2 are. They're just awful. And I know that the Quest 2 Fresnel lenses are actually quite good Fresnel lenses, but compared to the pancake lenses on this Quest 3, there is no comparison. The Quest 3 is so clear, it's so sharp, the resolution is better, but the lenses are the biggest thing, honestly. You could have the same headset, the Quest 2, and if you could just swap it out for the pancake lenses on the Quest 3, that alone could make it a worthwhile upgrade, honestly. It is so different, and when you realise it so much more when you go back the other way, honestly. Then with Fresnel lenses, you tend to have much more of like a sweet spot, and now, as much as the sweet spot's quite good, you tend to find that things around the edge of your vision are always slightly blurry. With the pancake lenses on the Quest 3, everything, no matter where you look, is completely sharp. And you can have the IPD slightly wrong and still see an incredibly sharp image. It makes a massive difference, especially when playing things like shooters and stuff like that, and you're looking far into the distance to try and see things happening. You can't make out details as well as you can on the Quest 3. Now, once I sort of got my head around how clear everything looked, or in fact how unclear it all was, I next noticed the software. The software is pretty much identical. There's a few minor differences, and there's a few settings that you do have on the Quest 3 and that you don't have on the Quest 2, and vice versa. But all in all, it pretty much feels like exactly the same experience. Even with the pass-through, so when you load up pass-through on the Quest 3, it's a colour, full colour, good depth perception, nice pass-through. And when you do it on the Quest 2, and you go back to the Quest 2, it's just sort of the same thing but black and white. They allow you to open windows whilst you're in pass-through now, same as you have on the Quest 3. It's just everything looks a bit rubbish. You can see around you and you can do things, and it's just details are gone and everything is in black and white. But other than that, it pretty much runs exactly the same. Performance-wise, it is a bit more juttery. I just noticed everything was slightly less smooth on the Quest 2. So the Quest 3 is a big upgrade in that regard. I noticed a lot of the time when I was on the Quest 2 in the home place, when you have the mirror open, I just found my home space was just constantly lagging and glitching, and the audio was cutting out. And like, if there's a little bit of stutter when you're moving your head, you can sort of get your head around that. But when literally the music is cutting in and out, it's so obvious, and it makes it such a not nice, polished experience. Never had that issue on the Quest 3 at all. Performance-wise, it's only ever been super smooth with me. I've never had frame rate drops yet, so that goes to show how good it is. But definitely was getting it a lot on the Quest 2, especially when you're in games that require sort of a bit more power. Again, talking more about the Quest 3, games that sort of push the Quest 2 to its limits, so things like Bone Lab and stuff like that, they perform a lot smoother on the Quest 3. So going back to the Quest 2 after playing that on the Quest 3 does feel like a chore. You can sort of just about get away with it, but once you've experienced it better, you don't really want to do that. Now, in certain games, for example, one of the main games I was testing during this thing was a game called Population 1. Now, that game is pretty much identical on both the Quest 2 and the Quest 3. There's not a lot of things I noticed that are different. I could be wrong, but if there is differences, it's barely noticeable. Now, other than the lenses being incredibly clear and sort of everything just looking sharper and just a nicer experience to play, graphically wise, it was was exactly the same. And that game performs fairly decently on the Quest. There's a few times I get frame rate drops when like maps are loading in and stuff like that. But it is quite rare once you're sort of in a game. Quest 3, again, no issues at all. So ran it really smoothly. But performance on that game wasn't something I was like, oh, crikey, this game's actually struggling with. It's only one of those sort of more sort of challenging games where that happened. Now, switching it over slightly, weight and comfort. Then this is a funny one because my strap for the Quest 2, the original strap that came in the box, I do not know where it is. And I've used a variety of different head straps ever since. So at the moment I've got this one on and it's incredibly comfortable. So it's a bit of an unfair point towards the Quest because there are so many of those head straps that are out and available, and the Quest 3 we're still sort of seeing them come through. Some things from certain companies haven't been made yet or aren't in stock, so that's obviously something that I was sort of quite happy going back to, is having a nicer head strap. That being said, it does still feel like it's not as snug. The Quest 3 sits much closer to your face. It comes out a little bit less. I think it's about 40% reduction. So you do find, even with the stock strap, which I will definitely change at some point, I just haven't got around to getting a new strap yet. But when I eventually do get a new strap, I'll be really happy. But even with the stock strap, it's much nicer. You can turn your head with less worrying about it shifting around. Another positive, going back to the pancake lenses, is that if the headset does shift around slightly, it doesn't affect how blurry the vision is. Now I know, for example, on the Quest 2, if it does shift a little bit, you're sort of constantly going back to sort of readjust your headset, make sure you can see. Same thing with the PSVR 2, which has got a terrible sweet spot. I love the headset, don't get me wrong, but the sweet spot issue on it is probably the biggest issue with it. But on the Quest 3, I never find myself doing that. I never find myself readjusting the headset because it never really goes blurry. When I put the Quest 2 on, it did. So there you go. In terms of weight-wise, they're pretty much exactly the same. So I didn't notice anything more difficult along that side. It is just sort of how much it wobbles around because of how far it sticks out. Now, the last thing I sort of noticed, and this is something that I actually did some sort of more in-depth tests, was the battery life. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that as and when I get an opportunity to test this, I've been sort of sticking it on there. First of all, I started off with the Quest 3, and I did using that same game, which is a game which runs exactly the same on the Quest 3 as the Quest 2. No graphical changes whatsoever. Is Population 1. Now, I ran that on the Quest 3, and I was quite disappointed with the battery life. It's a fairly demanding game in terms of battery life and power because there's a lot going on. Now, from full 100% battery to actually dying on me whilst I was in the middle of a game, that lasts me 1 hour and 44 minutes. When I went to the Quest 2 and I did the same test, bearing in mind the Quest 2 is a bit older, so if anything, the battery's going to have ever so slightly been a bit more strained. That same game, I got an extra half an hour of battery charge, so it was about 2 hours and 16 minutes. And I've done another video about this, but there's definitely some sort of battery issues going on with the Quest 3. Whether it's just the amount of power it's using or whether there's updates that might help. Now, there was an update that came out recently which gave you the option of sort of reducing some of the graphical fidelity and using that to increase your battery life. Now, I had that switched on and I did the same test on the same game on the Quest 3, and I actually got a time from 100% to 0 of 1 hour and 41 minutes, which is 3 minutes less than what it was with the power saver mode off. So I didn't think it actually made any difference. I feel like it probably is only going to be applying to games that are using that extra graphical power that the Quest has, and games that run the same on the Quest 3 and the Quest 2. It appears to have made absolutely no difference whatsoever. Now, one thing I will need to do is go on and test this headset, see how long I can get it on a game that has been graphically improved from the original Quest 2 version. I think that's going to be the only way I could probably actually test battery life properly. But yeah, Quest 3 battery life, not as good. It was nice having a little bit extra, although it's not a huge amount, but a little bit extra on the Quest 2 does make a nice difference. Now, guys, I would also sort of go through all of the exact differences between the two models, but I feel like that information's out there and you probably already know. I think it's more important that you guys get an actual person's impressions of it and the things they actually notice, because me just throwing numbers at you like pixel density and stuff like that. It doesn't actually make a difference unless it actually makes a difference to your experience. So hopefully what I've sort of portrayed today has given you an idea of how it actually feels going between the two. The question is it worth it? Which should I buy? Is it worth upgrading? And these are the things where it's going to depend on your own personal circumstances. I can think of a few scenarios that people might ask this question. The first is that which one should I get? Should I save some money and go for the Quest 2 or should I get the Quest 3? Personally, I would recommend you buy the Quest 3 if you have the money available. It is a lot better. The lenses are completely game changing. The pass-through and the mixed reality aspect of it as well is quite fun, and that's something that's probably going to develop a little bit more over the next couple of years too, which is really exciting if you have the headset. And then you do have that graphical bump on certain games, and that again, as these games start getting released and start doing these patches to sort of improve their games, you're going to start noticing that too, which is cool. Now, some of you might have the money for the Quest 2 and not the money for the Quest 3. And is it worth buying the Quest 2 now or saving and waiting to get the Quest 3? And that one is a bit of a trickier one to answer because it just depends on your patience and stuff like that. Because if you don't think you're going to get more money and you're sort of stuck around that sort of budget, you don't want to spend more than £300, the Quest 2 is still definitely worth it. Don't get me wrong. There's not huge amounts you can do more on the Quest 3 than the Quest 2. If it's going to take you another year to save up to get the money for the Quest 3, go ahead and get yourself a Quest 2. If you're only sort of a little bit away from the Quest 3, save and get the Quest 3. I think it's worth a little bit of a wait. If you're going to be waiting for ages, just get the Quest 2 and then save up some more money and sell it a bit further down the line, do you know what I mean? The next scenario is it worth upgrading to the Quest 3 if I already have a Quest 2? Now, that is what I did, and I'm definitely enjoying the Quest 3. Is it worth having both headsets? No, not really. You're going to want to sell one if you're going to get the other. Let's say you can sell the Quest 2 for £200, or roughly 2/3 of what you can buy it brand new for. Then essentially you're spending £300 and dollars to upgrade to the Quest 3. At that point, it's one of those things where it might be worth it, potentially. Ultimately, at this stage, there isn't a huge amount of difference other than the lenses and then a little bit of mixed reality content. When developers start producing more sort of higher quality games in terms of graphical fidelity and stuff, more mixed reality stuff starts coming out in future too. I think at that point it'll probably be worth that upgrade. I think right now you can hold off if you want to. I think if you upgrade, you're probably not gonna want to downgrade. I think that's what I've learned mostly from this. Once you have the Quest 3, you're gonna want to keep the Quest 3. But if you can hold off and potentially sort of wait a little bit longer, props to you, man. Do it. Go for it. I'd love to know what you guys think. Stick below in the comments. Is it worth the upgrade? What features are probably the most worthwhile things to upgrade for or to choose the Quest 3 over the Quest 2? I'd love to get your sort of feedback in the comments. Love that. But guys, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Woo!